Have you ever stared at a peacock's, that dazzling train? Or maybe you watched a black grouse just explode with vibrant colors during its display and just wondered, why? Why all that extravagant beauty? It seems almost absurd, doesn't it?
It truly does, yeah. And it's a question that has captivated scientists for decades, really, which is precisely what we're diving into today.
Right.
Our mission, if you like, is to unpack this fascinating world of sexual selection in birds. We want to explore what drives these elaborate, often incredibly costly displays and figure out what female birds are truly choosing.
So we're basically trying to get to the heart of this central mystery. Are these incredible ornaments purely signals? Like signals of health and strength, a kind of biological billboard for top-notch genes? Or could there be something else, a more, whimsical, even arbitrary force at play? Maybe just beauty for beauty's sake?
Exactly. It's a really profound question, actually. It goes right to the heart of evolution itself. And it all kind of starts with this puzzle, something known as the leak paradox.
Okay, the leak paradox. Let's unpack this a bit. First off, what exactly is a leak?
Okay, so a leak is essentially, well, it's a communal display ground. Picture male birds gathering together to perform for females.
Like a stage?
Pretty much. Think of it as a kind of feathered dating show, maybe, where the males put on their best, most flamboyant performances. And what's really striking is how incredibly choosy the females are at these sites. I mean, really picky.
How picky?
Well, often it's just one male, maybe only one single guy, who gets the bulk of the matings.
Wow, okay. So what's the paradox? What's so puzzling about this intense choosiness, especially when, you compare it to how other species choose their mates?
Well, that's the core of the paradox. Think about a monogamous species for a second, like, say, the red grouse.
Okay.
A female red grouse relies heavily on the male, right, for parental duties, defending their territory, helping raise the chicks, all that stuff.
Makes sense. She needs a good partner.
Exactly. So it makes perfect sense for her to be incredibly careful, very choosy about picking a healthy, strong male. It directly impacts her success. But then you look at lekking species like those black grouse or peacocks we mentioned.
Right, the showy ones.
Yeah, and the male's contribution to the offspring is, well, seemingly just a dollop of sperm, as some put it. He doesn't stick around.
So he's not helping raise the kids or defend the nest?
Nope. So the question becomes, why be more choosy when you're apparently getting less direct benefit from him?
Huh. Yeah, that is counterintuitive. And it gets even weirder when you think about the genetics, doesn't it?
It does.
I mean, if females are so intensely selective at these leaks, always picking the quote-unquote best males, wouldn't that create a genetic bottleneck?
You'd think so.
Wouldn't it reduce the genetic variation among males over time? Yet the females stay just as picky, generation after generation.
That's exactly the problem. It should reduce variation, making future choice less meaningful. And Gerald Borgia, the guy who coined the phrase leak paradox back in 1979, he famously noted that the choosiest species have the least reason to be choosy. It's a real head-scratcher.
Were there any early ideas about this? Like, maybe the preferred features just changed all the time, like fashion trends.
Yeah, that idea was floated, like maybe 1 year long tails are in, the next year it's bright colors. But that's clearly not what happens with bird ornaments, is it? Their consistency is quite striking. A peahen isn't suddenly going to decide she prefers short tails next year.
Right. The peacock tail is always the peacock tail.
Pretty much. So the paradox really lingered. And this led to two major competing explanations trying to figure out why these extravagant displays evolved in the first place. You've got Fisher's sexy sons hypothesis on one hand, and Zahavi's handicap principle on the other.
Okay, let's tackle Fisher first. Ronald Fisher's sexy sons, sometimes called the runaway hypothesis. What was his idea?
So Fisher's concept, and this was revived and formalized a bit in the 1980s by folks like Landy, Kirkpatrick, and Anderson, is basically this. A female preference for a trait, even a totally arbitrary trait, can just, run away through the generations.
Run away.
It becomes a self-reinforcing loop. Females prefer, say, long tails. Males with longer tails get more mates. Their sons inherit the longer tails, and their daughters inherit the preference for long tails. So the trait becomes exaggerated over time. The point of the ornament isn't necessarily that it signals direct health benefits, but simply that sons who inherit it will be attractive, get more matings, and be sexy sons.
So it's just about being attractive for attraction's sake.
In essence, yeah. It feeds itself.
Okay. And how did scientists react to this idea of arbitrary randomness driving evolution?
Well, a lot of them found it unsatisfying. Let's be honest, scientists generally like things to make clear, logical sense, you know?
Cause and effect.
Exactly. They prefer explanations that offer clear ways to test things experimentally. An arbitrary, random explanation felt, well, a bit too random, a bit flimsy. If it was just about picking the fittest males, surely there'd be simpler, less Baroque ways to advertise that fitness, right? Not these incredibly flamboyant, almost ridiculous displays.
Yeah, it doesn't feel very efficient, maybe.
Perhaps. So that kind of opened the door for an alternative. In 1975, Ahmad Zahavi came along with his handicap principle.
Okay, Zahavi. What was his argument? How did he explain the peacock's tail?
Zahavi argued that the cost and the risk of the ornament, that's the entire point.
The cost is the point.
Yes, a male surviving despite having a costly and risky trait, like those excessive tail plumes on a peacock, proves his superior quality, his health, his vigor.
So it's like saying, look how amazing I am. I can carry around this huge cumbersome tail and still avoid predators and find food.
Precisely. He's essentially signaling, I'm so strong I can afford this handicap and still thrive. Zahavi believed that many, if not all, sexual displays endanger their performers. That danger is the signal's guarantee of honesty.
That's fascinating. It actually reminds me a bit of that old idea from economics, Thorstein Veblen's theory of conspicuous consumption in humans.
It absolutely does. Good connection. Veblen argued back in 1899 that, wasteful spending on luxuries by the wealthy, big houses, fancy jewelry, whatever, was precisely to demonstrate their immense wealth.
Because only someone truly rich could afford to waste resources on something useless.
Exactly the same logic. If you can afford the cost, you must have the underlying quality, whether that's wealth or biological fitness.
But Zahavi's idea wasn't immediately accepted, was it? I remember reading it faced a lot of criticism initially.
Oh, intense criticism. Yeah, for several reasons. First, it lacked solid experimental or mathematical proof at the time. It was mostly an intuitive argument.
And it didn't explain everything.
Right. It struggled to explain the sheer diversity of ornaments. What about things like the Argus pheasant's optical illusions on its feathers? Those aren't necessarily costly to grow or maintain in the same way a giant tail is. And there were logical problems pointed out, too. Richard Dawkins famously asked, well, if a handicap proves vigor, why wouldn't males evolve with just one eye or one leg to really prove how tough they are?
Good point.
Yeah, it leads to absurdities. There was also the Smucker's jam analogy someone made. If a bad name makes the product seem really good because it overcame the bad name, why not call it Death Camp Jam? It highlights the flaw.
And didn't Dustin Penn also point out a kind of circularity in the argument?
He did, yes. Penn noted that Zahavi claimed these signals had extra costs making them wasteful, but then also said these costs demonstrated honesty. But Penn argued if those costs ultimately lead to big rewards like getting all the matings, then are they really wasteful? They're an investment, not waste.
So it wasn't really a handicap in the truest sense.
That was the argument. For these reasons, yeah, Zahavi's original idea was largely seen as, well, frankly, a bit of a laughingstock in evolutionary biology through the 80s. Big names like John Maynard Smith, a real veteran evolutionist, even stated pretty bluntly that in polygynous species, Fisher's runaway process was probably overwhelmingly more important.
Wow. Okay, so it was kind of sidelined, yet in 1990, something changed. A mathematically skilled biologist, Alan Groffin, came along.
Yes, Alan Groffin. And his work seemed to provide the rigorous mathematical proof that Zahavi's idea needed. Or at least that's how it was seen.
How did his work change things so dramatically?
Well, Groffin took a sort of secondary suggestion from Zahavi, this idea that males might adjust their displays based on their current fitness or condition, and he formalized it. He built a mathematical model around it. His models show that these flamboyant ornaments could be condition-dependent.
Condition-dependent, meaning?
Meaning that only a truly fit, healthy male, a male in good condition, could actually grow and maintain a large, vibrant, intricate display. So females could then essentially read the male's underlying quality directly from the quality of his ornament. Its color, its shine, its size, its complexity.
Okay, so the ornament isn't a handicap per se, but an honest indicator, because only the best males can produce the best version of it.
That was the interpretation, yes. And this approach really seemed to crystallize thinking for Well, pretty much a whole generation of biologists. Major theorists, John Maynard Smith, Richard Dawkins, Bill Hamilton, they all endorsed this as an apparent vindication of the handicap principle.
So it felt like science had found the answer, the rhyme and reason they were looking for.
It really did. It felt much more satisfying than Fisher's seemingly arbitrary process. Graffin himself was quite dismissive of Fisher, calling his hypothesis too clever by half. So for decades, really, this graphinized version of the handicap principle became the dominant framework. It was the way to think about sexual selection.
Okay, so this condition-dependent handicap idea reigned supreme for quite a while. But science never stands still, right? Starting around 2015, you mentioned Dustin Penn, the same guy who criticized the Javi earlier, along with Sobol Samado, decided to take another closer look at Graffin's original model.
That's right. They went back to the mathematical foundations.
And what did they find? Did it hold up?
Well, what they found was truly revelatory and quite controversial. Penn and Zamado concluded that Graffin's model was not actually a handicap model at all.
Not a handicap model, after all that.
Nope. They argued it was purely a condition-dependent hypothesis. Full stop. Their realization, basically, was that, as they put it, there is no theoretical or empirical support for the handicap principle, and that it can be rejected for many reasons. Quite a strong statement.
Wow. Okay, that sounds like a really crucial distinction. So what did Graffin's model actually show, if not the value of a costly handicap?
What Graffin's math actually showed, according to Penn and Zamado, was that the fittest males don't find the ornament excessively costly. In fact, they're the ones best able to minimize the trade-offs involved in producing and displaying it.
So they're not maximizing a burden. They're showing off how efficiently they can produce the signal.
Exactly. They're demonstrating their quality by showing they can produce a great ornament without it being a major drain. It's about revealing quality, not about demonstrating resilience to a self-imposed burden. And they also reiterated the point. If an ornament reliably earns you matings, it's biologically not wasteful. It's a worthwhile investment.
So the whole costly handicap idea was maybe a misinterpretation of the math.
That's their argument. Now, Graffin himself disagreed, naturally. He apparently claimed Penn and Zamado were just tilting at windmills. But nevertheless, they published their findings in 2020 in a paper titled, quite provocatively, The Handicap Principle: How an Erroneous Hypothesis Became a Scientific Principle.
Oof, that's pulling no punches.
Not at all. They clearly laid out their case that Graffin hadn't proven the value of wasteful extravagance. It wasn't really about the cost itself being the message.
Okay, so if we set aside the strict handicap idea and focus on condition dependence, we still have the original leak paradox nagging us, right? If these condition-dependent traits are just about showing off current fitness, how is enough genetic variation maintained in these lekking species for females to keep choosing? Shouldn't the best genes spread quickly?
Ah, yes. Back to the paradox. And this brings us to another really fascinating theory, one proposed by the brilliant Bill Hamilton, the Red Queen hypothesis.
The Red Queen. Like from Alice Through the Looking Glass.
Exactly like that. Remember, the Red Queen tells Alice it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place.
Right. You have to keep running just to stay still.
Precisely. Hamilton applied this idea to the constant evolutionary arms race between hosts and their parasites. Think about the COVID pandemic. It's a perfect, if unfortunate, example. New strains of the virus constantly emerged, evading our existing immunity.
Yeah, forcing us to keep developing new vaccines, new defenses.
Exactly. We had to keep running just to keep up. Hamilton proposed that this kind of perpetual arms race is happening all the time between animals and their diseases or parasites.
Okay, so how does this connect back to bird plumage?
Well, in 1982, Hamilton and another biologist, Marlene Zook, put forward a specific theory. They suggested that bright, colorful plumage acts as a signal of genetic resistance to these constantly evolving parasites.
Ah, so the bright colors say, my genes are good enough to fight off the latest bugs.
Kind of, yeah. It's a signal of current health and underlying genetic resilience against the prevailing parasite threats. And they made a really cool, testable prediction.
What was it?
2 parts. First, within a species, the brightest, most colorful males should have the fewest parasites. They're successfully fighting them off. But second, and this is the clever part, between different species, the most colorful species should be the ones that are most plagued by parasites overall.
Wait, why? That sounds backwards.
Because those are the species where the selection pressure from parasites is strongest. They need to evolve these bright, honest signals of resistance because the threat is so high. It's a constant dynamic signal against an ever-changing enemy.
Okay, I think I get it. The species with the biggest parasite problems need the flashiest, I'm healthy signs. Is there evidence for this?
There's some intriguing evidence, yes. Studies looking at North American birds found a weak but statistically significant correlation between how colorful a species is and its overall parasite load, fitting the second prediction. And there's also this interesting observation that birds living on islands are often duller in color compared to their mainland relatives.
Why would that be?
Well, islands often have fewer types of parasites and diseases compared to large continents. So the thinking is maybe there's just less pressure to maintain those costly, flashy displays if the parasite threat is lower.
Less need for the bright warning signal.
Possibly. And there's another compelling piece, the connection to hormones like testosterone. Testosterone often plays a role in developing bright feathers and colors.
Okay.
But high levels of testosterone can also sometimes suppress the immune system.
So it's a trade-off.
Exactly. It potentially makes the signal honest. A male needs testosterone for the display, but if he's not genuinely healthy, jacking up his testosterone might make him more vulnerable to sickness. You cannot fake it till you make it, as the saying goes, on the lick. Trying to boost your color too much without the underlying health could backfire badly.
That makes a lot of sense. An honest link between the signal and the quality. But does this parasite idea fully explain everything? Thinking back to those grouse species, you have hazel grouse and red grouse. They're monogamous, kind of dull looking, and they don't leak.
Right.
Then you have black grouse and sage grouse, polygynous, lecking, bright, flashy males. Does it really sound convincing that only the lecking species, the flashy ones, need to worry about parasites? Surely the dull ones get sick too.
That's a very fair point, and it highlights the nuance involved. It's probably not just about parasites, or at least not in the same way for all species. Perhaps for the red grouse and hazel grouse, where the male provides direct benefits like territory and food, females prioritize signals related to that. His ability to hold a good territory might be more important than his parasite resistance, relatively speaking.
So different priorities depending on the mating system.
Could be. And for the black grouse on the leek, where there's no territory or parental care on offer, maybe the emphasis shifts much more heavily onto demonstrating raw health and vitality. Showing off every bright feature, those red combs, the white feathers on their bum, the iridescent blue sheen on their neck. Maybe that's like a multi-point inspection.
How so?
Well, maybe a perfect, pristine white bum is hard to maintain if a bird has diarrhea from an infection. Or maybe lice or mites would dull that glossy neck sheen. It could be a very detailed, visible health check, almost like that little line on a curved test strip revealing an underlying issue.
A full body scan for disease. Interesting. What did wider reviews find? Wasn't there a big summary by Anders Muller in 1999?
Yes, Muller did a comprehensive review looking at many studies. The results were a bit mixed, actually. Many studies didn't find much effect either way. But where connections did exist, they generally supported the Hamilton-Zook idea. The more colorful species tended to have more parasite problems overall, but within those species, the more colorful individuals seemed better at controlling them.
So some support, but maybe not the whole story.
Exactly. He even found evidence like bird species with dichromatism, where males are colorful and females are dull, tended to have larger immune organs, like the spleen, suggesting a greater investment in fighting disease. But what's really fascinating about Muller's review, in hindsight, is what it didn't emphasize.
What was that?
He largely omitted or downplayed Ronald Fisher's runaway hypothesis as a serious alternative explanation for all this color and display. It really highlights a kind of pervasive bias that existed in the field for a long time where, as one writer put it, adaptive mate choice has dominated the scientific discourse. Everyone was looking for the adaptive reason, the good genes benefit.
The search for rhyme and reason again.
Pretty much, which sets the stage perfectly for our next major figure, Richard Prum.
Ah, yes, Richard Prum, a professor of ornithology at Yale. He takes this whole discussion in a really radical, almost provocative direction, doesn't he? With that bold claim. The reason birds are so beautiful is because they don't have penises.
It's a fantastic grab you by the lapels kind of statement, isn't it? And it cuts right to the core of his argument about female control.
Okay, explain the logic. No penis equals beautiful birds. How does that work?
So Prum's logic goes like this. Ancestral birds, like their dinosaur ancestors and like mammals today, almost certainly had penises. We know this because some ancient bird groups, like ducks and tinamous, still have them. And even in chickens, the male embryos start developing a penis, but then a specific gene kicks in and causes it to shrink away before hatching. But in the vast majority of bird species alive today, the penis has completely disappeared.
Why?
Prum argues this loss gave female birds significant control over mating. Without a penis, forced copulation becomes incredibly difficult, if not impossible, for most birds. The female has to actively cooperate for fertilization to occur.
She has the final say anatomically.
Essentially, yes. And this anatomical control, Prum argues, shifted the evolutionary dynamic towards females choosing males based on aesthetic appeal rather than males trying to coerce females, which leads us to the ducks.
Oh, yes, the exception that proves the rule.
Yeah.
The astonishing duck penis arms race, explored by scientists like Tim Burkhead and Patricia Brennan.
It's one of the most dramatic examples of sexual conflict in the animal kingdom because male ducks do still have penises and forced copulation is common, and it has led to this unbelievable evolutionary arms race. Some male ducks, like the Argentinian lake duck, have evolved these truly gargantuan corkscrew-shaped penises.
Gargantuan how?
Get this, up to 42 centimeters long. That's often longer than the bird itself. It's coiled up inside him most of the time.
That's mind-boggling. Why so extreme?
It's thought to be an adaptation to overcome the female's defenses, because female ducks, in response, have evolved equally peculiar vaginas. They're also spiraled, but often twisted in the opposite direction to the male's penis.
Opposite spirals.
Yes, and they often have these blind-ended sacs or pockets off to the side. These anatomical features make it incredible. Exactly. He sees the elaborate courtship displays, the beautiful songs, the dazzling plumage in birds without penises as a different kind of arms race, a psychological or aesthetic one. Both, he argues, are products of this dynamic of sexual selection driven by female discernment, female choice.
Okay. And this forms the core of his 2017 book, The Evolution of Beauty. What's the main argument there?
His core assertion is that biologists have been, frankly, too utilitarian for too long, too focused on finding the practical, adaptive, good genes explanation for everything, the lineage running from Wallace and Huxley through Zahavi and Graffin. He argues they've neglected the ideas of Darwin himself, and particularly Fisher, about the power of random exaggeration of seduction for its own sake. For Prum, sometimes beauty happens. It doesn't always need a utilitarian justification.
It can just be beautiful. And that's enough.
That's his point. It's driven by female desire, female aesthetic preference, which can take off in arbitrary directions. His own fieldwork on licking mannequins in South American rainforests provides some compelling examples.
Mannequins. What's special about them?
Oh, they're incredible. They perform these utterly bizarre, complex dances on their legs. Some make unique sounds, like wing songs, by vibrating specialized feathers. And Prum points out that even closely related mannequin species often use completely different chemical pigments to achieve similar feather colors. Why? Maybe just diversification for its own sake, driven by subtle shifts in female preference.
So not necessarily signaling different aspects of health, just different styles.
Kind of like different fashions arising in different populations. And this leads Prum to his most radical proposal, perhaps.
Which is?
He argues that Fisher's runaway hypothesis, the one predicting arbitrary display traits that indicate nothing other than mating availability, should actually be our starting point, our default assumption, the null hypothesis.
Whoa. Flip the script entirely. Assume it's arbitrary until proven adaptive.
Exactly. He believes that biologists' inherent aversion to causelessness, our deep-seated desire for that rhyme and reason, has made it almost impossible to be a contemporary Darwinian, to fully embrace Darwin's original insights about the power of aesthetic choice.
That's a powerful critique. Does he have a killer example of this non-adaptive beauty?
I think his prime example is the club-winged mannequin. He calls it a case of evolutionary decadence.
Evolutionary decadence. Sounds dramatic. Tell us about it.
It really is an extreme case. This little bird creates a bizarre, violin-like wing song. It doesn't sing with its voice. It makes the sound by rubbing specialized wing feathers together at incredibly high speed.
Okay. Weird, but maybe not that decadent yet.
But how it does it? To make the sound effectively, its actual wing bones, the ulna, specifically have become transformed. They're solid, thick, ridged, almost spoon-shaped structures, completely unlike normal bird wing bones.
Solid bones, but doesn't that affect flight?
Massively. It makes their flight more awkward and presumably less efficient. Prum sees this as a clear case where a female mating preference for this specific sound has driven the evolution of a trait that is actually detrimental to survival in other ways. It's pushed the species down a potentially hazardous evolutionary path. And get this, even the females, who don't make the sound, have these same weirdly shaped suboptimal wing bones because they inherit the same genes.
So the preference for the male song is so strong, it's resulted in poorly designed wings for the whole species.
That's Prum's interpretation. A pure triumph of aesthetics over practical utility. Decadence.
Incredible. And Prum's work doesn't just stop with living birds, right? He's also looked back in time at dinosaur feathers.
Indeed, he's done groundbreaking work using fossilized melanosomes. These are the tiny pigment-containing structures within cells. Because they fossilize and different shapes correspond to different colors, Prum and his colleagues can actually reconstruct the likely colors and patterns of feathered dinosaurs.
Seriously, we can know what colored dinosaurs were.
To some extent, yes. For example, they studied a small feathered Jurassic theropod called Anchiornis huxleyi, and they found it likely had these striking black and white spangled wings, gray body feathers, and a bold reddish-orange crest on its head. A pattern that, interestingly, echoes the kind of look you see in a modern black grouse.
Wow. So these display features go way back.
Way back. And here's where Prum makes another radical deduction. We now know that many dinosaurs, including relatives of T-Rex and Velociraptor, had feathers. But they had them for millions of years before any of them evolved flight.
Right. Feathers came before flight.
So Prum asks, why did feathers evolve in the first place? His conclusion. They likely evolved initially for colored display and for sexual selection. Insulation maybe played a role too, but the colors suggest display was key from the start.
So feathers weren't originally for flying, they were for showing off.
That's his argument. Flight was a later co-option of structures that were already becoming elaborate because of female choice. And this completely reframes the role of sexual selection. It elevates female choice from being just some evolutionary sideshow to being potentially right at the heart of evolution itself.
So female preference for beauty might have indirectly driven major evolutionary innovations, like feathers, and maybe even flight.
That's the implication. Prum argues that female choice played a huge role in the elaboration of life, making the world more complex and diverse. It's this liberating idea that beauty and desire are free to explore and to innovate, and thereby transform the natural world.
It really makes you see things differently, and it kind of leaves us mammals looking a bit drab in comparison, doesn't it?
Doesn't it just? As Prum points out, most mammals are shades of brown or gray. We rarely have bright plumes, iridescent patches, or sing complex, tuneful songs. With our paltry 3-color receptors compared to the 4 or even 5 that many birds have, we're likely visually ignorant of the glories of the world.
We see birds, insects, fish as maybe colorful, but they probably see a world far more vibrant than we can imagine.
Absolutely. We're the grim, dull, utilitarian, monochrome bores of the vertebrate world in many ways. When we humans admire a bird of paradise or a stunning sunset, we're just glimpsing a fraction of what other animals perceive. As Prum so wonderfully puts it, mammals are prose, birds are poetry.
Wow. What an incredible journey we've taken. Seriously. Yeah. From just asking, why are male birds so pretty, to this really profound reevaluation of the fundamental forces of evolution. We've seen how science twists and turns, how ideas rise and fall, challenging deeply held assumptions about adaptation and purpose.
It really underscores that female choice isn't just a minor detail. It's this incredibly powerful and yes, often seemingly arbitrary engine of evolutionary change, shaping the beauty and diversity of the world around us in ways we're only beginning to fully appreciate. That drive for beauty itself, for aesthetic experience, can be a potent evolutionary force in its own right.
So, thinking about all this, it leaves you wondering, doesn't it? How might our own human understanding of beauty, our attractions, our desires, how much might they be echoes of these deep, ancient, sometimes utterly non-utilitarian evolutionary dances? What other arbitrary elements, what other aesthetic preferences might be driving the world around us, maybe even our own societies, in ways that we're still too busy looking for the simple rhyme and reason to really see?
That is a fascinating thought to end on. What else are we missing? Because